All right. Let's talk about what is going on in Israel. So Israel had their fourth election attempting to install a government. So the way it works in Israel is that they have many, many parties, and those many parties run elections and they win seats. So unlike the United States where we have Republican and Democrat, maybe you get a few from the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, but for the most part, we have a two-party system. Israel is a parliamentary system called the Knesset. And people run for seats in their various different parties, and the various different parties end up winning various amounts of seats. Netanyahu's party is the Likud party. It's a very right-wing party. And Netanyahu earned 30 seats in this election. They need, in order to have the majority, in order to run the government and start forming the government and start, in order to kind of break this down in easy terms, imagine, so you've got Joe Biden, right, as president, and see how he's installing cabinet members and they're going through, he's appointing cabinet members and they're then approving, nominating, he nominates cabinet members and then they get approved by the Senate and all that stuff. So, and confirmed and whatnot. So imagine that process, you're forming the government. And then once you get your government together, then you can actually start making some decisions, right? Well, in Israel, they're kind of in this stalemate, and they've been in this stalemate for now 2 years, where they've attempted to form a government. But in order to do it, in order to start forming that government, the leader has to have a majority by one. So they need 61 seats in the Knesset. There's 120 seats in the Knesset. They need 61 in their coalition in order to start forming that government and starting to make decisions and running things. So the way it works when you're in a parliamentary system is your party gets a certain number of seats. And in order for you, so Netanyahu, his party received 30 seats. That was the most of any of the parties, but it wasn't enough to form a government. So what he's got to do is go around party by party, handshake with all the leaders, and start striking deals and say, hey, we'll give you this in exchange for you forming this coalition, saying that you're coming together with us and that we can then run the government together. Get me to that 61 seats. And if we get me to that 61 seats, then I'm the prime minister and I've shook your hand on some things and we made some deals. This is in some ways, it's obviously a flawed system. We're seeing this, the flaws of this system kind of play itself out in real time in Israel. But the benefit of the system, as you could imagine, is if we ran a system similar to this, then the Republican Party, for example, would have to shake hands with, let's say, the Libertarian Party and give them something that they're really, really wanting. And then they would have to go and shake hands with, let's say, Trump's, Patriot Party, if he were to start one, and give them something. And then maybe even they would have to kind of go for us more progressive populists and say, okay, if you guys join us, I know you guys are more left wing, but hey, we'll give you what you want too. This is the thing you really want, and it's not really antithetical to us, so we'll go ahead and go for it. So you want to come join us. So it helps even smaller parties get some leverage and have a voice and actually have some power in the government. That's the benefit of a parliamentary system. The downside is you could end up in this situation where people just won't form coalitions with anybody. And then you never have that majority rule and you never end up forming a government and you have to have election after election after election after election. Well, the twist in this particular election, the fourth time around, is that the Arabs actually won more seats than they normally have won. Now, the Arabs have typically been a party called the Arab List, and it's really a coalition of various different Arab ideologies, right? Because you've got more right-wing Arabs and more left-wing Arabs, and you've got all these different types of political ideologies amongst the Arabs, but they have typically traditionally formed what they call the Arab List. And they've just coalesced together because what they always say is, we're just here to make a statement and to be here, but we're not really going to participate. We're not going to form a coalition. We're not going to join any of these parties and form a coalition. We're just going to sit here. The problem with that is they have no power ever. And they're just kind of there to make some statements, to observe. And they're sort of, and they're taking seats away from other parties. But other than that, they don't really, they're boycotting, they're protesting. And that is why why they say we're not going to form a government with any of these, in their minds, they say, any of you Zionists, right? We're not going to do it. You guys are stealing our land and you've kicked out our people over to Palestine. And so we don't want to have anything to do with any of you guys, but we're just going to sit here and we're going to observe and we're going to be kind of a part of it and say some things. And, that's the way it's going to be. But we're not going to coalesce with any of you. So that's kind of been the attitude of the Arabs this whole time until now. There was a little bit of a split in the Arab list. And there's a new party that formed, and it's called the Ram Party, led by Mansour Abbas. And what's interesting about this particular faction that broke away from the Arab list is that it's an Islamist Arab group, and they have their religious sort of ideology is rooted in the same religious ideology as Hamas. And they actually won, I believe, 5 seats in the Knesset this time around, making them interestingly powerful. So the issue is that Netanyahu is shy a few seats in order to form this coalition. He needs 61, and I believe at this point he's only at 58 or 59. So he needs another group to coalesce with him. Now, all the other parties have said we're anti-Netanyahu. So on the other side of Netanyahu, there's all of these different parties that say, we don't want anything to do with you. We think you're crooked. We think you're corrupt. And in that sort of what they call the change movement, they want change. They don't want any more Netanyahu. He's been around for 12 years. They want the guy gone. In that change movement, there's a variety of different political ideologies coalescing together against Netanyahu. That is right-wing, left-wing, moderate, all over the place, okay? They don't want Netanyahu. And so this new Arab party, the Ram party that broke away from the Arab list, however, says, we're open. We're open to chatting. And this is something that none of the Arabs have ever said before in the Israeli parliament. Again, what I told you is that they said, no, you know what, we're kind of protesting. We're not going to join in with the coalition. What that does is keep them constantly in the minority party, in the minority coalition. And we see how minorities have very few rights when they're in the government. Like right now, Republicans, well, right now it's a bit different because they're so divided 50-50. But in previous times, you see that the minority party in the government has very little power and just kind of has to sit there and watch the other party run amok. And that's usually what the Arabs do. But this time, this party is saying, you know what, we're open to chat. And the reason is because they're saying that they want better living conditions for the Arabs living in Israel. They want they've got high crime rates, they have low employment. They have the inability to really get permits to expand for building. They have a lot of garbage in their neighborhoods. They're just definitely not getting the sanitation that they need. They're living in like slum-like conditions comparatively to the rest of Israel. And they're saying that they want to make some change. And this particular party is realizing that the only way to get that change is to potentially coalesce and maybe even coalesce with the enemy a little bit. And Netanyahu has been kind of an enemy. He's been saying some pretty harsh stuff about Arabs, and some others in his coalition have as well. Some of them are very right-wing. Believe it or not, Netanyahu's party is not the most right-wing. There's other really right-wing parties in Israel, and they want these Arabs gone completely. They say they should be banned. They don't want them around at all. In particular, this group, they say that they side with terrorists and they don't want them, because they have some of the same sort of fundamentalist ideology as Hamas, and they're saying we don't want to have anything to do with them. And so, but what's interesting is that this group is saying, you know what, we're willing to maybe think about playing ball this time. Never have before we thought about it, but now we're actually thinking about it because we realize that if we coalesce with you people, that we might actually have a little bit of a voice, right? So if you're shaking hands with all these other parties, striking deals, saying, okay, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, we'll give you this. Well, shake our hand and say you're going to give us some better protections for our neighborhoods, for our people. Give us some rights that we're lacking at the moment as a group. And so as we speak, Netanyahu is trying to get this Islamist Arab party that has, again, their roots are, they are in the same ideology as Hamas. Interestingly, he's trying to get them to act as kingmaker. and potentially put Netanyahu in power in Israel. It's a odd, surprising twist that nobody really saw coming. Many of these political leaders, they continue to say, a lot of very harsh language towards Arabs and towards the Palestinians. They have a lot of, some of them have very, very right-wing ideas where they feel like no one in Israel can make any decisions unless they are Jewish. They can't be Muslim. So there's a lot of this real tension, obviously. And so this is a big shocker for everybody. Now, as of right now, some of the real right-wing parties inside of Netanyahu's coalition are saying, we will not coalesce with those people. So if they come on board, we're out. So that creates a problem, right? So Netanyahu needs those 61 votes. So if he gets the 5 from the Ram party and he loses, let's say, 7 from another party, then that's a problem. So it's this balancing act. And this is kind of why Israel's had this problem with trying to form a government for now 4 elections. And they might head to a 5th if they can't do it this time. But this is just a very, very odd twist of fate. This is a very odd twist because it is, nobody saw this coming. And the fact that this party might actually be the kingmaker, it just kind of goes to show, like, be careful who you're mean to, right? On both sides. Like, all of that rhetoric that was demonizing all these Arabs, and then suddenly you realize you need them. And all of their, and the same thing, if the Arabs are saying to the Jewish Israelis, if the Arab Israelis are saying, you know what, we're never going to work with you. And then their cities and their neighborhoods and their cities continue to end up going down the gutter because no one's really advocating for them and no one has any power to really advocate for them. That's a problem as well. So it's interesting. And I think from my perspective, I understand how difficult it would be to shake hands with somebody that you believe is harming your people. And by the way, this doesn't have really a whole lot, unfortunately, to do with the Palestinians and the Palestinian question and what is going on the West, in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. This doesn't really have much to do with the Palestinians themselves. This has more to do with how the Palestinians who remained in Israel, how they're treated. Now they're called Arab Israelis. They're not called Palestinians, even though they're of the same people. That is because Palestine is its own nation, or at least it should be. And so so the Palestinians living inside of Israel then are just called Arab Israelis, I guess. This is a very interesting twist. We're going to keep our eyes on this. My guess is that they don't end up forming the coalition after all, that I don't know. You know what? It was a surprise that this even happened. So who knows? That would be a very big surprise. Personally, I think that, I understand it's very, very difficult to shake hands with somebody that you think has been destroying your home, harming your people completely. But in order to get that harm to stop, at some point you do have to just say, it is time to shake hands and make some sort of a deal. And that's going to be hard, not only for the Arab Israelis, but also for Netanyahu and others in his coalition, for them to have to just swallow it and say, okay, we now are coalescing with this group we never thought we would coalesce with. And in exchange for that, we have to start listening to some of their demands of what they want. That is going to be difficult for both sides. But honestly, I think it is the best path forward for them. It will still be very difficult. I think a lot of the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza will feel betrayed. They will feel like, that these are the very people that are eradicating our very existence, that are agreeing to build settlements illegally on our land, that are continuing to do various different things, kind of microaggressions that they do, and some that are not so micro against the Palestinians. And so I could understand that there will be a sense of betrayal by the Palestinians. I completely understand that. But I think that there does need to be, at some point you have to kind of say, we've got to start we can't just continue to boycott and protest and it's just harming our people over decades. At some point you have to say, we've got to put these differences aside somehow. and we have to start moving forward for the benefit of our children, for the benefit of the next generation, and for the benefit of the now, and kind of say we're going to sort of try to put the past behind us. It's very difficult to say. It's very difficult because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, I think, really the driving force of nearly all the conflicts in the Middle East. And of course, the driving force of the United States Middle East policy. And it's not an easy, it's certainly not an easy situation. And I've been there myself, witnessed it for myself, spent some time in the West Bank, and inside of Israel and inside of the Arab communities inside of Israel on the Israeli side of the wall. And something has to be done to attempt to elevate the lives of the Palestinians. It is bad, guys. It's really bad. And I can't even express how bad it is until you go see it with your own eyes. And a lot of the Israelis don't know how bad it is because they're not allowed to go and see how bad it is. There's signs all over the place, red big signs basically saying if you go down this road and you see these, you're going to end up dead. You're going to go see, you're going into the zoo with monsters. I mean, there is a lot of fear mongering, and because of it, there's a lot of Israelis are not seeing it. There is a rising, very much a growing base of Israelis that are beginning to say, and they have been for a while saying, we have to change. This treatment is not okay. We're not okay with this. We want to live in peace and harmony with one another. And this is not the path forward. There's actually a growing number of Israelis feeling more and more like that every single day. And there's even lobby groups here in the United States that are also feeling that way. J Street is one of them. And so there is sort of this movement, and there is sort of this shift in mentality amongst the Israelis. And now we're kind of seeing maybe a shift even amongst the Arabs, which is interesting. So we will keep our eyes on this and see where this goes. But a lot of this does, I know that for many in the United States, they might feel like this is really boring and, oh, what does it matter? It's another country. Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with our foreign policy. So do you like war? And if you don't, then maybe pay more attention, because it is important for shaping the future of America's foreign policy. So I'll keep you guys posted on what is going on with that.